The story of the Northern Pennines starts right here atop Crossfell, because this is the highest point in the whole of the Pennines and the centre of England's largest stretch of moorland, almost 1,000 square miles of the stuff. It's an area so wild and remote that parts of it have never even felt the fall of human feet. It's home, among other things, to over half the British population of this magical creature, friend to King Arthur and to the ancient heather moors of England's North Country, Falco columbarius. An endangered species, the merlin, but here on the Pennines it's made a comeback, and the population and my friend here, as you can see, are in good shape. Now, merlins and me have something in common. We share the same habitat, for the Northern Pennines have been my home for the last 30 years. So come join us on an overview of the backbone of England, the Pennines, from the very top. The foundations of this, the great Windsill Rock, were forged on the anvil of our volcanic past. But the shapes we see today are in the main thanks to the action of ice and the water which was later released. The great crystal mantle which covered this land for thousands of years melted away only about 12,000 years ago. Liquid water gave birth to the four mighty rivers, the Tyne, the Tees, the Wear and the Eden, and revitalised the dales of Yorkshire, Cumbria, Durham and Northumberland. These fertile, stone-washed dales in time became home to generations of Pennine people, Celt, Roman, Saxon, Norman and Dane, each wave of culture leaving its own mark on the landscape, but none could erase the heritage of ice. Unique communities of wildflowers, some from the ice time, some from the warmth that followed. Arctic, alpine, woodland and moorland blooms which have survived the rigours not only of climatic change but of people pressure. Over 136 plants of botanical interest, perhaps most famous of all the oh-so-blue Teesdale gentian. But what about the Teesdale violet and bird's eye primrose? A delight to the eye and to the local insects, together making this area worthy of its national nature and its World Biosphere Reserve status, now managed as such by the Raby Estates and English Nature, with their man on the spot, Ian Finlay. So this is the famous Willywrank Fell weather station, and with the high peaks in the back there, marginally subarctic climate, all the cold air ponding down here onto the fell. That's why the reserves are here, all the Arctic alpine plants. And what's the weather station told us in the 18 years?
I think it's highlighted that there was worry or concern about the reservoir warming up the microclimate. In the first 10 years after it was built, the grass min temperature rose by 0.1 of a degree. And this last winter, the reservoir was solid for 2 months.
So that great heat store hasn't really affected it. Global warming?
I'm very sceptical about that. I do think that if that's going to happen, it's going to be a very, very long-term thing rather than happen overnight.
But how well are the plants doing? I mean, we're right in the middle of the most sort of special place. I mean, are they doing as well as they used to?
Oh, I think so, yes. If there's any pressure, it could be from public pressure. I mean, waterfalls always attract the general public. And you can, by sheer weight of numbers, put pressure on the vegetation. I think that's a fact we have to live with.
In your 18 years here, what's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to you?
My daughter lives in Mallorca, is married, and I came back to the airport in Newcastle, and as we flew over, I happened to look out of the window, and I looked down on Widdybank Fell and saw the reservoir and the fell, and it really was quite exciting seeing it from a high altitude.
Your patch.
My patch.
Carry on looking after this very special place.
Pink salmon once swam in the clear crystal seas. Now with no pink and dorsal fins show, but still the powers of a man brought the rain to its knees. On these banks the flowers still grow. On these banks the flowers still grow. All the views that I cherish, no stark purple moors. As strangers I could note both place, and the contrasting beauty is free to behold, where those hills meet the valley of tears. Those hills that make the valley of tears.
All this, in fact, the whole of the Northern Pennines, clear to the top of Cross Fell, was once covered with trees, a mixture of elm and oak, of birch and alder, and not that long ago either. Then along came the first farmers, and they removed the trees in order to graze their animals and in places to plant their crops. Unfortunately, at the same time, the British climate took a turn for the worse. It got wetter, and so the trees couldn't regenerate, and much of the area became covered with a blanket of peat, in which heather found a good home. Then other forms of upland land management for the raising of all sheep and later of grouse made it even better for heather to grow, drainage and regular burning. And so it gave us the Pennines, as we like to think of them, a ribbon of heather-clad moorland in full bloom at this time of year. It also gave the world a world record, because a metre square of well-managed heather moor produces 16,000 million pollen grains. These moors also hold another world record, a record bag of red grouse, Lagopus scoticus, Britain's only endemic bird, which means that it's found nowhere else in the world. The managers of the heather moors are gamekeepers like Alan Edwards of Barlingham. Year in, year out, they alone take care of the valuable grouse.
Our harvest time is shooting time, so as soon as the harvest is over, it's like the farmers, they replant the seed, we've got to start again. October generally sees the start of heather burning, so if there's any available conditions for heather burning, we try and heather burn. And obviously burning and breaking the heather up and allowing young growth to come is one of the most important things. Bracken needs to be controlled. Areas of badly eroded ground, we need to dam up streams or stop the erosion by regeneration of the ground, and it's all an ongoing thing to maintaining the habitat, because without the habitat there wouldn't be a moorland gamekeeper would be able to come up here. We can't do anything artificial to the birds at all. It has to come from the habitat. The people who are working to preserve the moorland at this moment in time are predominantly people who are interested in grouse. Grouse shooting is the only way of saving the heather moorland in the way that it is at the minute. Overgrazing by sheep, afforestation, the encroachment of bracken are the three major threats, and they've taken the toll since the war of thousands and thousands of acres of heather moorland. Heather moorland is so special in so many ways. Obviously the heather's here and it's purple today while we're sat here, but it supports such a specialised range of plants, animals and insects and birds that it's really, if we lost this habitat, we'd lose so much, not just the heather. We get the majority of upland breeding waders. We get the golden plover, the curlew, the green plover, red shanks, snipes, dunlin. We have a lot of small birds, the meadow pipits, the wheat ears, the ring ousels, which are sort of very specialised to moorland areas. And also at the top of the tree we have the predatory species, the owls and the birds of prey, which prey on them. And obviously the shining example of really moorland management hand in hand with conservation is the merlin, really. And it is a bird which benefits directly from the gamekeeper's activities and the management which he lays down for it.
So, all our Heathermore, complete with its landscape value and all its wonderful diversity of plants, insects, animals and birds, isn't natural at all. In fact, it's people-made and people-managed. The grouse and their keepers share this purple patchwork quilt with another lonely denizen of the fell, the hill shepherd. The grouse are raised for the glorious 12th and the sheep for the glorious lamb chop. Each grouse has its own territory, and so do the sheep, for they rarely stray far from the heft they first knew as lambs. That is, unless the fell is overstocked, for then the flock must stray far from its home range in a desperate search for food. Their whole lifestyle and the habitat which supports them starts to go into decline thanks to overgrazing. Erosion is today the biggest threat to these purple pastures, for it is the intimate mix of vegetation which has thatched the landscape and the hills through the passing of time. The first feet to cross this fell were the earliest immigrants, who used the more open woodlands of the highest ground for ease of passage. It used to be known as Fiend's Fell, not for the long, splodgy trek to the top, but after the shrieking winds which bedevilled all comers. It became Crossfell only after St. Paulinus erected a cross on the top back in the 7th century, banishing all the demons from these parts. 1,300 years later, new potential fiends have arrived on the scene, human visitors in all shapes and forms. Following in the footsteps of Tom Stevenson, pioneer of the Pennine Way back in the 1930s, millions of boots have taken their erosive toll. The experience is wonderful. Not the roof of the world, but it is the roof of England.
One thing about this, it's pretty, you know, it's a pretty good walk. Fortunately, to Crossfell, it's nearly all uphill. Yeah. But then, then straight down once you get there. Yeah. The trouble is, you disappear into the cloud usually on top of Crossfell as well, or before you get there.
Can you see it from here? You can't see the top of
The man with his feet on the ground and his eye on the problem is Terry Wells, warden of Moorhouse Nature Reserve, heart of the Biosphere Reserve of international importance.
Any plants and animals?
Oh yes, it's got some rare plants, some good birds. On the Pennine Way, you'll not see much of the plant, you know, the rare plant species. They tend to be away in the boggy areas and at a lower altitude.
Yeah. And we saw a peregrine falcon yesterday.
Oh, and I could meet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making an awful racket.
That's right. Yeah, it's got some youngs around. Yeah.
Is there anything else up there of any interest?
Buzzard, possibly buzzard, one or two dunlin, golden plover, red grouse.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, a few kestrels, I suppose.
The odd kestrel, yeah. They tend to like somewhere there's a building where they can breed in, as opposed to rock. I mean, they will breed on rock cliffs, but we don't generally get kestrels breeding on the cliffs up here. But certainly in some of the old buildings, they will nest.
Yeah.
Okay, better get going now.
Yeah.
Gary Gill or bust.
Well, I hope you enjoy your day and I hope that the weather stays fine for you. The erosion of Pennine is caused mainly by people moving over from one track once it gets wet and muddy over onto another track, creating another track adjacent to the previous or the first track, and as that gets wet, then they move over onto a much drier place, and you finish up eventually with a 5-lane highway. We stood by the part of the Pennine Way where it actually comes on to the Moorhouse National Nature Reserve, and as you can see, it's not too badly eroded in this section at all, mainly because we don't get the weekend traffic like they do in the Dales and the Peak District National Park. The people on this section of the Pennine Way are generally the ones that are doing it for the whole of the full 252 miles of the Pennine Way. On one occasion, I had a chap who was doing the Pennine Way, and he was doing it as a bet. He'd been cajoled by some of his mates in the local pub that I bet he couldn't do the Pennine Way or something similar to that, and they decided to do it as a bet and for charity. And I met the chap on a foul, horrible day. It was that bad, I wouldn't even get out the Land Rover right on the top of Dunfermline. The guy was wearing shorts, and he'd already fallen in one of the main rivers before he got down to Dufton, up to his neck nearly, and was lucky to survive and get down to Dufton. It's a very harsh climate, and we have something like 250 days of rain. 70 of those can be snow, and we can have something like 90 days of snow lying. The climate is akin to the climate of Iceland and the Arctic. And in fact, when they were constructing the radar dome, there were some chaps from Sweden and that year, and they said they'd actually worked all over the colder continent, including the Arctic and Antarctic, and they said that was the worst environment they'd ever worked in.
The cold of that marginally subarctic climate may be ideal for the mountain flowers, but those fiendish winds still send the hardiest walker to seek solace by the fire in the company of friendly locals. Tan Hill, highest pub in England. A living fire. There's nothing like it. And yet, you know, not long ago, before the invention of television, this thing, the hearth, was the centre of every family home. And of course, fire has played an immense role in the whole history of the endeavours of humankind. First of all, it allowed people to clear vast tracts of land for grazing their animals and planting their crops. It kept wild animals and even enemies at bay, and then gave people the power of moulding charcoal and iron and inventing all the playthings of the 20th century. Now, I like to keep my living fire as the centre of the family, at least during the autumn and the winter, because it gives us some sense of season. And it is a very, very important place, for on this plot of land on which my house was built, there was industry hundreds of years before it ever became the revolution which changed the world. As pretty as a picture, my home, and I can tell you that the garden overflows with wildflowers and wildlife, all that nature has deemed should be there. Yet, less than 100 years ago, this was all abuzz with industry. Just one of the real job centres of the North Pennines, which then supplied the country with iron, lead and limestone. The whole process was sustainable on a local scale. A workforce of people, 5 water wheels and smelt fires fed with wood and charcoal from the wraparound forest which then filled the valley.
And this, we think, represents the last load that was ready to go into the smelters. And at that point, the gaffer came along and said, "OK, boys, finish." And we think that was the end of 500 years of iron smelting in this area.
That's my brother, and he's decided to excavate the site, and things are getting really exciting because we now know that at the end of the 1300s, the Prince Bishop of Durham got really cross about people nicking wood from his forest not far away and smelting iron. And so somewhere around here, he set up the first official iron bloomery, and I think it's right down below my feet. It's great fun trying to trace the history of your own backyard. Hard work into the bargain, but not as hard as the work which created all this in the first place. That for me is the real magic of the Pennine Dales. A hard-worked landscape, a treasure house of experience, wonderful things to see and explore, all set in 1,000 square miles of rolling moorlands, mountain tops and grassy dales, in which nature and people across the centuries have together found a way of life. Just take a look. 360 degrees and it's all wild, wild wilderness. Or at least the nearest thing England's got left to wilderness of any sort. And the lie of each one of these landscapes tells us the same old story, the struggle between people and nature to make a living out of a very harsh landscape. And we see stories of great success, of failure and of abject mismanagement. But it's the end result which is the important thing. All these diversity of wonderful landscapes, a testament to the fact that given time and thanks to the healing power of nature, something of beauty and immense value is always created. And the fact, you know, that our friend the Merlin can still dive and swoop over these hills and make a home beside us in the North Pennines certainly is the grand finale, music to all our ears. The 8:35 from Garrigill, the school bus which now wheels the children 4 miles away to Alston. One of the highest villages in England and still bursting with life. And why not? Because after all, round here you can breathe what must be amongst the purest air in the whole world. Even back in the height of the lead mining era, the local Garrigillians were well known for their longevity. So much so that in 1832, to celebrate the passing of the Reform Act, they held a party here on the village green. And at the head of the table was John Martin and his wife, both reputedly 102 years of age. For their descendants, the New Penniners, life is not an endless summer, but a 4 seasons affair.